Hello, my name is Carrie Walker with NACE. I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar, The State of University Recruitment Programs in 2023, New Data on Hiring and Retention Strategies. It is my pleasure to introduce Kate Beckman, Community and Insights Executive Manager with Ripple Match. Take it away, Kate.
Hi, everyone, and thank you so much to NACE for having me today. I hope everyone has had a good week. Happy Friday. Really excited for today's webinar to talk about the state of university recruitment programs in 2023. We have some awesome new data on hiring and retention strategies, and I'm really excited to share it with everyone today. I'm going to go ahead and get started, but I do want to say just feel free to leverage the chat, chime in if you have any thoughts about today's content. We will be having a Q&A portion as well. So if you have any specific questions about today's content, definitely use that Q&A chat box. But I always think it's great to have a little bit of interaction with each other in the chat. So feel free to leverage that chat box and let's make this an interactive session. But again, welcome if you're just signing on. My name is Kate Beckman, and I'm excited to present today's topic of the state of university recruitment programs in 2023. Going to get started with just a quick agenda of what we're going to be going over today. So the first couple minutes here, just an introduction. So I'll introduce myself again, to share a little bit about Ripple Match, and then a little overview about the data we'll be talking about today. Then we'll go into the state of university recruitment programs. We have a new data set to share there, all about how university recruitment programs are approaching things like recruitment, retention, candidate experience, as well as their hiring projections for 2023. Then we actually have another brand new set of data on Gen Z job seekers in the second half of this data presentation. So two different sets of data that I'm really excited to share. To introduce myself again, especially for folks who might have just signed on in the last minute or so, my name is Kate Beckman, and I am the Executive Manager of Community and Insights at Ripple Match. And my role at Ripple Match, I'm responsible for conducting all of our research on Generation Z, recruitment trends, so surveying those in the talent acquisition space, serving Gen Z candidates, as well as spearheading all of our community-based events or educational programming at Ripple Match. So I'm always happy to connect on LinkedIn if you have any questions about today's content or just trends in the space in general. So again, my name is Kate Beckman, and I'm excited to be your speaker for today. To kind of go over what Ripple Match is and what we do, Ripple Match helps employers and candidates find the right match. So what we do is remove that time-intensive part of the job search for both employers and candidates. So if you're an employer looking for Gen Z candidates to connect with on our platform, early career candidates, you're able to put in all of your desired qualifications, maybe your diversity goals, things like location. And then candidates, on the other hand, they put in a ton of data on their experience and skills, career goals, location preferences, a bunch of holistic data points that then allows our platform to match together those opportunities and those candidates, and really surfacing opportunities that tons of candidates don't actually know existed. So we often find that candidates didn't know they were qualified for a role, but because of this matching process, employers are getting qualified candidates, and candidates, on the other hand, are uncovering opportunities and getting connected with a really good start to their career. So if you want to know more about Ripple Match, feel free to connect with me afterwards or visit ripplematch.com to learn more. Today's insight focus areas. So to go over the data that we'll actually be talking about today, I just want to give a brief overview of this. So we have a couple of different data sources that we'll be pulling from. So all of this is original research that was conducted by myself and my team at Ripple Match. But to give you an idea of what we'll be talking about today, we have a November survey of 200 top university recruiting programs. We have a January 2023 survey of about 3,500 Gen Z candidates. And then we have some other data sources that were previous pulse surveys we conducted in 2022 of Gen Z candidates to compare and contrast the survey we did in January of Gen Z. So a couple different data sources here, but essentially what to understand is we have data that we surveyed talent acquisition professionals, and we have data on Gen Z candidates. So a couple different areas here, and we'll be going through that in the sections on the next slides. So let's start off by talking about the state of university recruitment programs, insights across program sizes. So before we get into the actual insights here, I want to give a little more detail about how we surveyed these 200 early career programs and how we actually collected this data. So Ripple Match, we actually host an annual awards called the Campus Forward Awards, which recognizes excellence in early career hiring and recruitment. So through a detailed application process, early career teams highlight their strategies for recruitment, candidate experience, D&I, and overall commitment to hiring and retaining the next generation of talent. So from that, we are able to select the winners of the Campus Forward Awards, which represent the best of the best selected from hundreds of applications from across industries and program sizes. So these are split into 4 categories of the top 50 teams. So small programs, mid-size, large, and enterprise, which you can see here, the scales that we reflected that. So 100 or less early career hires, that's entry level and interns would be small category, and enterprise would be programs that hire more than 500 early career hires total a year. So from this data, we are essentially able to get a snapshot of what are the top 200 programs this year, 2023, doing for their strategies, which is allowing us to really benchmark what are those top programs doing for those who want to take a look at what are the best practices, how are folks approaching hiring this year. And another quick thing before we get into the data, we're going to go over a lot of data in the next several slides. So I do want to give everyone the chance to download our latest report that has this data, which is the State of University Recruitment Program. So while you will have access to the slide deck, this presentation actually has all of the data we'll be going over in this specific section. It has a lot of words written alongside of it to provide context as well as some additional data that we aren't including in the slides today. So I recommend scanning this QR code and downloading the report. And just to answer a quick question in the chat here about when does the application open for the awards each year, we tend to open those applications in October of the following year. So the applications will be open in October 2023. And we do try to blast that everywhere on our social media through via email of those in our lists. So definitely keep an eye out for that. And we do have another couple awards that we try to run throughout the year. So feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn if you'd like to know about the awards program that we want, which is really a recognition of those in the campus recruiting space. But go ahead and download this for more information about the award-winning teams here. All right, so let's get into the data. That's why we are all here. So the first kind of data point that I want to talk about today is the full-time hiring projections that we were able to discern from the top 200 teams that we surveyed. So within that application, we asked companies to share their hiring numbers for the 2021-2022 season versus the 2022-2023 season. And then we were able to compare the differences to show that this percent of companies either stayed the same from season to season, they increased, they decreased. And I do want to also, remind everyone this data is collected in October through November of 2022. So there have been a number of changes, obviously, in the past several months. But this, I do want to also just, ground this in the fact that a lot of companies did have their hiring kind of for early career cemented down. So what we're seeing here is that even with the economic slowdown, which definitely was in place by October and November, we aren't seeing a overwhelming decrease in early career hiring projections. So the most affected program sizes were mid-size, with 20% of teams saying that they were planning to decrease their program size from 2022 season to 2023. But we're seeing a number of increases, especially with large programs. And the largest share really is that companies are staying the same. So no companies are really completely walking back their commitment to early career and changing their projections from year to year. So what this really tells us is that there's not a dramatic decrease despite the market slowdown. And while there have been a lot of layoffs and a lot of headlines, especially in certain industries like tech, we aren't seeing that early career hiring is, being completely deprioritized from last year when there was a hiring boom to this year. We're seeing something similar on the intern hiring projections. We're actually seeing even less of an impact with intern hiring projections. So as you can see here, of the companies that won our enterprise program category, there is actually a 0% decrease reported from the enterprise programs from the 2021 to 2022 season to this season. So this is just notable in that sense that companies really are recognizing that their interns, their early career hires play a really important role for the long-term future of their company. And while things are definitely difficult and there's been shifts in the economy, a lot of companies aren't sacrificing their commitment to early career hiring, and they're figuring out how to make it work so they don't, miss out on several years of talent to develop down the road. We also did take a look at this by industry. So this is an example of, in our report, there's actually several more pages of the industry content. We took a look at all of the industries, so you can see which industries had the biggest decrease, smallest decrease. But for the sake of this presentation, we just identified those that were seeing the least amount of decreasing. So as you can see here, the industries that are the most, I suppose, early career decrease proof would be hardware manufacturing, construction, CPG, and insurance. So of all the companies that were included as winners of the Campus Forward Awards across program sizes, none of them actually plan to decrease their early career hiring from last season to this season. We see something a little similar on the intern front. We see that travel and hospitality is either increasing their intern hiring or staying the same. Hardware manufacturing, construction, as you can see here, similar as we saw on the previous slide. And then health, pharmaceuticals, and medical devices, we're seeing either staying the same when it comes to intern hiring or a little bit of an increase. So as you can see here, a big commitment to just getting interns in the door. And as we'll see in the next slides, it's because interns really are really important for these companies to convert to full-time employees. So let's talk about the internship conversion rate data that we collected. So as part of our measurement to see which companies made it into the top 200 programs, we did take a look at what is the average full-time offer extension rate to summer interns. So as you can see here, we have this data grouped by all the programs together, but we did want to get granular to see how does this offer extension rate vary depending on program size. So small, mid-size, large, enterprise. As you can see here, for the most part, most companies are extending offers to interns at above that 70% rate. That's pretty consistent with those mid-size, large, and enterprise. The smallest, offer extension rate, small programs, we are seeing that about 30% of those are extending offers to interns, for a full-time offer at about a 30% rate, which makes a lot of sense considering that small programs don't always necessarily know the headcount they'll have next year. Maybe small programs is more for the experience of the internship rather than actual conversion to full-time. But we are seeing that those mid-size, large, and enterprise programs are really assuming that these interns that they're investing in are going to convert to full-time employees, and they're making this investment as an investment in the future leaders of their company and that early talent. So we're definitely seeing that if a lot of these programs were to drastically decrease that hiring, that would really impact their pipeline for several years to come. So we're definitely seeing that folks are maintaining a focus and a priority on this early career talent. In terms of internship offer acceptance rate, what we saw is that despite the fact that small programs are extending those return offer acceptance rates at a lower rate, we are seeing that the majority of our award-winning programs, we're extending those. We're seeing acceptance rates from those summer interns at above 80% for the most part. What's interesting here is that we are seeing that the sort of highest acceptance rate is actually mid-sized programs. So mid-sized programs are seeing a really, really solid return offer acceptance rate. And enterprise programs, so programs that have a ton of resources, are really quite large, have a ton of interns, are not seeing quite as high of an offer return acceptance rate from their summer interns. So still quite high. We're definitely still seeing that a majority are above a 70% acceptance rate, but in comparison to some of those other programs, we are seeing the highest acceptance rate in that mid-size and large programs, as well as small programs. So definitely interesting to see here is that companies really want their interns to accept those return offers, and we're seeing relatively high rates, but they do vary a bit by program size. Moving forward to the actual strategies. So again, when folks were filling out this application, they had to select from a multiple choice set of things in terms of what they do for their strategy. So what we were able to see here is what share of programs are doing certain strategies. So when looking at this data, this is a good way to determine, okay, what is the standard that a top tier program is doing? And as we'll see on the next page, what is a little bit less common in terms of the top programs, what's not the norm. So as you can see here on this page, this is essentially what nearly all top programs are doing. So forming strategic relationships with a diverse range of colleges and universities. That's definitely just a standard strategy. Participating in both virtual and in-person university career fairs, another standard strategy, though we do see a little bit less of that from small programs, which makes sense. They don't have as much of a budget to travel or connect with these career fairs. Forming partnerships with local campus orgs, leveraging early career specific recruiting technology to increase efficiency and effectiveness, hosting events for early career candidates that are centered on professional development. What's interesting here is that you can see obviously the programs with more resources such as enterprise programs are able to do more of these strategies, but we are still seeing a large share of those small programs, mid-sized programs able to do these strategies. We actually see that mid-sized programs, for example, leverage early career specific recruiting technology the most out of all the program sizes, which makes a lot of sense when you think of the fact that they do have relatively high numbers to meet in terms of getting students in the door, but they might have a leaner team and need to rely more on technology in order to move through those candidates and operate at peak effectiveness. So just a couple things to kind of point out there. Moving forward to looking at, as we got a little bit further down with the commonalities, as we can see here, we're seeing a smaller share of companies doing these strategies. So as you can see, only 52% of small programs are participating in career expos with professional organizations, such as Grace Hopper, NSBE, compared to 89% of enterprise programs. We're also seeing that mid-sized, large, and enterprise programs are forming partnerships with national and regional orgs at a relatively similar rate, but again, smaller programs don't have as much of the budget to invest there. We're not seeing from small or large programs as much of an investment in online innovative employer branding strategies such as TikTok or Instagram. And in campus ambassador programs to strengthen employer brand have fallen a little bit in popularity. So as you can see here, only between 30 and 42% of programs are actually investing in those campus ambassador programs, which makes a lot of sense. Candidates are not, on campus in the same way that they always were. So something to kind of take away here is that, those career expos, performing those national partnerships are definitely a bread and butter strategy for a lot of these large programs, but smaller programs are definitely figuring out ways to compete in that space, such as hosting those school agnostic virtual info sessions or panels, even if they can't necessarily be on the ground or at these national expos. I'm going to take a quick, just a question here that I want to clarify. So the least popular avenues mean the companies don't see the value in them, or they have just not activated the strategy. So the way this question was worded is, which strategies are you currently employing to recruit the next generation of talent? So early career talent. So what the companies were doing when they're filling out those applications is doing a checkbox of every strategy that they're currently investing in, actively doing. And so what I gleaned from this data is that for whatever reason, our companies decided, our teams decided that they did not want to pursue that strategy. They're currently not doing it. And whether that's because of bandwidth, or they just haven't gotten around to trying it, or they tried it and determined that it's not a good strategy. That's what I would say is what I would discern from the data. So I think, for example, investing in a campus ambassador program to strengthen employer brand, consistently, we're not seeing as many companies doing that. And that doesn't mean it's not a valuable strategy, especially if you're only, a third of companies are doing that. There's a lot less competition in that space. But for whatever reason, around 70% of companies haven't decided that among all the methods they could do, that's the most valuable one. Just gonna take what's considered small versus mid-size versus large versus enterprise programs. I'll actually just go back to one of the slides really quick to just remind everyone about that. Just I think that'll be helpful. A little high up there. Okay, so the category sizes, just since we do have a couple more slides, I want everyone to feel in the know about that. Small early career program was considered 100 or less early career hires. So that would be both intern and entry level combined. Mid-size would be between 101 and 250 early career hires. So, 150 entry-level candidates, maybe 50 interns, large is 251 through 500, and then enterprise would be more than 501 early career hires, so both interns and entry level. And we had companies, when they submitted the application, provide the numbers of the candidates that they hired per year. So that was how we had the projections of the previous year to this year, and we were able to put these in their categories because we wanted to ensure that we were comparing a small program to another small program rather than a small program to an enterprise program. So that's the categories there to just consider here. So let's get back to where we were. But thank you for submitting those questions. If you have any other questions about the data, definitely submit those in the chat, in the Q&A, and I'm happy to answer those in real time to make sure everyone feels just in the know about the data here and understanding what we're talking about. Cool. So moving on to candidate experience strategies, how top programs are investing in candidate experience. So again, this is where we provided a full list of strategies here, and the companies who are applying selected which ones that they are currently doing. So as you can see, the standards here, the kind of best practices is clear job descriptions, rejection notifications, dedicated time for candidates to discuss offers with recruiters or HR, personalized follow-ups and check-ins from the recruitment team, diverse slate of interviewers, introductions to current employees for informational conversation. Something interesting to note here, despite the variance of program sizes, we're not seeing too significant of a variance among these different strategies. We, of course, there are more time for applicants to maybe talk with an enterprise program versus a small program, or, personalized follow-ups is maybe easier for a little bit of a larger program, but we're not seeing too much variance here. So this is pretty standard to think of what does a good candidate experience look like? What are companies currently doing to invest in candidate experience? Here's a good benchmarking set of data. In terms of what companies are doing a little bit less of in terms of the share of companies that are employing these strategies, as you can see, we start to get a little bit smaller of a share of companies doing timely responses to initial applications. So within 5 to 7 business days, and both updates about application status. We don't see a large amount of companies actually doing rejection reason if applicants are not selected for the role. So while most companies are notifying applicants if they're rejected, not a ton of reasons there. We aren't seeing a ton of compensation listed on job postings. And I know there have been a number of laws that have gone into effect since we did this survey in November, but these companies that applied were scattered throughout the country. So this is a pretty good representation of someone who, might post that for the law, but also might just be posting it based on a best practice. We're also not seeing actually a ton of travel costs covered for on-site interviews or on-site visits post-offer. So while this might have been standard practice before when in-person interviews were happening a lot, we aren't seeing a large share of companies, even enterprise programs, which have, by far very large budgets for this, especially in comparison to small programs. We're not seeing that paying for on-site interviews or on-site visits post-offer. And that doesn't mean that's not a valuable strategy. It's just we're seeing the largest share of companies. We're not seeing quite as many doing that, but it could also be a way, if you are a lesser known program, a lesser known company, to give yourself an edge to win over certain companies, just knowing that this isn't something candidates are actually experiencing with the majority of companies. One thing I do want to point out that is a little bit interesting here is this timely response to initial applications and timely updates about application status. So in our data on Gen Z that we've collected in the past, we actually asked them, what is the number one thing that contributes to a negative candidate experience, or asking them to select what are the things that contribute to a negative candidate experience. And the number one thing that actually contributes to a negative candidate experience is not hearing back to from a company within a timely response, such as 5 to 7 business days. So the largest share of Gen Z candidates selected that option. I think it was around 70%, said that was the number one thing that contributed to a negative candidate experience. And as we're seeing here, it's not totally adopted by all companies to be able to achieve that timely response to initial applications. And we actually are seeing that mid-sized programs and small programs are able to achieve that timely response more often, and a larger share of those programs than enterprise programs and large programs. Makes a lot of sense given the influx of applicants, just given how much there is to focus on and prioritize. But That is something to know, that if you are a smaller mid-sized program and you are wondering, how can you compete with larger enterprise programs, timely response to applications is something that Gen Z really does want, and they consider to be a mark of a really positive candidate experience, but companies have not yet necessarily cracked the code on how to achieve that on a regular basis. So just some interesting notes there. Moving on to D&I strategies. So again, asked all of our applicants to select the things that they are doing in order to prioritize diversity and inclusion. So as you can see here, a ton of companies have adopted unconscious bias and diversity training for hiring managers and interviewers. A lot of companies are introducing interns to employee and business resource groups. There's a lot of investment in those diversity focused partnerships. A lot of teams, especially at the enterprise level, have one or more team members dedicated to promoting D&I within early career hiring. A lot of investment in technology. We're seeing a lot of specific strategies to recruit candidates from HBCUs. We're seeing from the enterprise program level, a lot of recruitment events for underrepresented candidates that are centered on professional development. So resume workshops, interview prep. Not seeing as much of that from small programs, but definitely is an adopted strategy. And then other strategies that are still relatively mainstream, but are starting to vary in terms of what share of companies have adopted them. Seeing from large and enterprise and mid-sized programs that participation in those diversity focused conferences such as Grace Hopper, Afro Tech, and then internal professional developments. Then we start to see a little bit of a drop off in terms of the share of companies doing the following things. So while we do see a lot of enterprise programs, 77% investing in early education programs, such as for high school, early college, to close those representation gaps. Small programs don't have quite as much resources to be able to do that. Specific strategies and events to recruit candidates from HSIs. Seeing a lot of that from enterprise programs, around 50% of mid-size and large programs targeting HSIs, and around a third of small programs targeting HSIs. In terms of hiring of candidates from non-traditional educational backgrounds, such as boot camps, we're seeing around 50% of nearly all programs going that avenue. So there's around 50% that aren't doing that. And then what I would say is around maybe the biggest area of untapped talent. So where a lot of companies and programs aren't pursuing this. We see the small programs all the way to enterprise. It's actually specific strategies and events to recruit candidates from community colleges. So as you can see here, 24% of small programs are doing this and 42% of enterprise programs, but we're not seeing a large share of companies actually employing specific strategies and events to recruit candidates from community colleges. So that's an area where if you're thinking where might you look for candidates, form new partnerships, form new connections, especially to recruit another diverse slate of candidates. Community colleges are not tapped into all the way yet. We're not seeing a large share of programs pursuing that avenue, but they really are a great avenue to connect with students from so many different backgrounds. And really increase diversity in a lot of ways. So that's something to take away from this, that it's still something that's being developed and worked on, as well as those candidates from non-traditional educational backgrounds. And moving on to our last set of benchmarking here for what companies are doing. So retention strategies, we asked how top programs are retaining the next generation of talent. And it's really exciting to see here that so many companies across the board are seeing the importance of having access to mental health resources and support. So all companies, all program sizes are above 90% here in terms of offering that mental health resources and support. We're also seeing a lot of internal training and upskilling. Even small programs, 80% of small programs offer some kind of internal training and upskilling, while 98% of enterprise programs do. Mentorship programs, also very popular. Flexible work, of course, inclusive community building events, a lot of really good strategies here. And even on the next page, when we start to see a smaller share of companies doing these things, we're still seeing a lot of really great stuff to retain the next generation of talent. So as we can see here, a lot of companies are offering career mapping for achieving promotions and growth. We're seeing executive speaker series for early career employees. Financial literacy training and advising is actually a relatively high share of companies offering this, which is really exciting to see because we know that Generation Z places so much importance on fiscal responsibility, and as we'll see in some of the coming slides, is really concerned about just compensation and financial security. So that's a really interesting one that we're seeing a lot of companies offering. And as you can see here, rotational or leadership development programs, see a lot of enterprise and large programs offering that, but a little bit less at the small program level, which makes sense as companies tend to be smaller or don't have as much of an infrastructure for early career talent. So key takeaways here before we move on to our next data set. I would say early career hiring really remains a top priority for companies. So as we saw from the data, the award-winning programs that we featured today are continuing to prioritize early career talent. And it's really important that if you want to remain competitive, ensuring your program does have some sort of contingency plan, some kind of long-term way to just continue surviving even if times get tough. So that's what we're seeing a lot of. Another thing is there's a multifaceted approach to recruitment. So as we saw from those recruitment strategies, it's not just companies going to campus. It's not just companies going to those large national events. We're seeing companies, yes, going to campus, going to career fairs. We're also seeing them hosting their own school agnostic info sessions and virtual events. We're seeing a lot of, connecting and using technology to connect with candidates. We're seeing partnerships with local organizations. We're even seeing, some investment still in those campus ambassador programs. So CHOP programs are really incorporating multiple methods to attract candidates. And finally, we're seeing an investment in conversion and retention. So as shown by the data, top programs are seeing just high intern conversion to full-time employees. So companies are also investing then in those benefits to retain talent, such as mental health resources, professional development, and more. So these are the main takeaways from all of the data that we just saw. And again, we have a lot more of this data in that report, so I recommend that you download that. And as we move on to the next section, I do want to just remind everyone, if you have questions about any of the data that we went over, or just any questions about the topics that we went over, please submit those in the Q&A box. And I'm happy to answer questions in real time, but can also circle back to those at the end. So definitely feel free to submit those and we will make sure that we answer those. Okay, moving on to an entirely new data set. So I hope everyone was ready for a lot of data today because we have a new data set we're going to go over now. So shifting gears away from that survey of employers, and now we're focusing on Generation Z. And the thing to kind of think about this in terms of how this can impact strategy and program is we just took a look at how university recruitment programs are approaching recruitment, what they're doing, what their benchmarking is. And now we're going to look at what Gen Z wants from their job search, what they're struggling with, what their challenges are. And this really can help inform your programs going forward to help make sure your strategy is in touch with what Gen Z is going through right now. So the data we're going to look at is actually survey data that we collected in January 2023. So just last month, we have a survey of about 3,500 students. And then to compare and contrast some of our findings from this survey, you'll also be seeing some data that we collected in August 2022 and March 2022. So about a year ago. This will allow us to really take a look at how some of these attitudes, challenges may have changed over time or may have stayed the same. So the first set of data we're going to take a look at is students are not confident about finding the right opportunity in today's climate. So this is a question that we asked in fall 2022. So that August survey is, as you search for jobs and internships, how are you feeling about securing a position based on the current job market and economy? Currently, we are seeing about 51% of students are not confident that they will find a job or internship that meets their standards, with about 49% now saying they are confident. So it's currently about half and half, but the larger share of students are not confident about finding the right opportunity in today's climate. And this is a shift from what we saw in the fall. Well, we did offer a third option for students to select. We saw a lot more students neutral. We only saw 15% of students saying that they were just flat out not confident about their job or internship search. So definitely seeing an increase in that. We asked students actually also what are their biggest challenges when they're conducting that job or internship search. So why are they not feeling confident? And what we're seeing here is students are definitely spooked about the fact that they are seeing widespread layoffs on LinkedIn. They're reading about it in the news, and that's contributing to them actually not knowing which companies are hiring interns or entry-level candidates amidst widespread layoffs. So, imagine you're a student, you're checking LinkedIn, you're checking different news sites, and every day you're seeing more and more news of layoffs. It's kind of hard to know if you go to a job site or you're researching a certain company, are they in the midst of layoffs? Are they going to lay people off? Are they hiring interns or entry-level candidates? So 55% of students, that was the largest share for the answer, are saying that they are not really sure which companies are actually hiring. So if you're a company that is hiring, this is a great example of how proactive communication, really seeking out students and letting them know that you do have opportunities, that your company is continuing to hire, is in a good place, can be a really great way to connect with students during these times. Just a question in the chat, there is a recording that will be shared after. And the second challenge is finding a role that's right for skill sets and interests. So this is one that's really interesting, that 48% of students are saying it's a challenge to even match with the right opportunity, to find one that's right for their skill set and their interests. So while there might be a lot of roles out there, students are having trouble actually identifying, this is a role that I'm a good fit for, based on what I'm interested in, based on what I'm actually good at. This is a role that I think I should apply for. So a lot of students are having a hard time with that. We're also seeing some of the typical challenges, such as having an initial application stand out to recruiters, being ghosted by recruiters. Only a third of students are concerned about finding a role that meets their salary expectations, and about 30% are identifying it as a challenge that they aren't going to be adequately prepared for the interview process. Moving on to another thing that's kind of showing just the challenges students are facing. So we did ask students, how many applications do you predict you will have submitted during the entirety of your search? So this is students who are still searching for a job. So we asked them, in fall and also until you get a job, how many applications do you think you will end up submitting? What we're seeing here is the largest share of students are submitting more than 50 applications. So 45% of students are submitting 50 or more applications. And if you add up some of these percentages, over 50% of students are submitting more than 40 applications. So we're really seeing a high share, definitely a high share of students that are submitting just a ton of applications. So I think when you think about the mindset that these students are in, they're really thinking, I don't know which companies are hiring right now, and I also don't know which role is necessarily the best fit for my skill sets, interests. So I'm just going to submit a lot of applications. That's actually one thing that we are working to solve at Ripple Match, is that our product really tries to limit this, countless applications, just kind of putting them out there to really make sure that when a student is served an opportunity, it's saying you were qualified for this position because of these reasons. And then when a student actually opts in to say, yes, I'm interested in this role, they are often routed to a first round interview with that recruiter, because there's actually that correct matching of skill sets, interests, and also the company deeming that they're the right fit. So trying to tackle this a really large share of applications that students are having to submit. Another interesting point here is virtual events actually this past fall have slightly overtaken in-person events as the most attended recruitment events. So we asked students, this past fall and into the spring, did you attend more virtual or in-person recruitment events? 47% of students said that they attended more virtual than in-person events, but we did see that 38% attended more in person than virtual. So it's a slight bit of a difference. So we are seeing technically more students are attending virtual events than in person, but still a very large share of students that are attending more in person than virtual. And 15% are attending an equal amount. So we're definitely seeing this interesting split of a sort of hybrid approach to the job search. In terms of other job search methods, this is an interesting stat, because we have students, which of the following platforms, tools, and methods have you leveraged most to discover and apply to jobs and internships? And we're seeing here that when it comes to career services and attending career fairs, around 25% of students are identifying this as the method that they leverage the most. So we're seeing online platforms like LinkedIn, Ripple Match, other job platforms as the primary way students are actually discovering and applying for jobs and internships. And we're not actually seeing a ton of students identifying that they're using TikTok to discover and apply to jobs and internships. So something to keep in mind when you're thinking about what strategy should we be doing, where should we be investing our time to really get in front of students when they have that intent to find a job or internship. TikTok, Instagram, while there might be some accounts that go pretty viral and there's a lot of career advice accounts on TikTok, it's not necessarily the place that students are in the mindset to actually discover and apply to jobs and internships. So you will likely be much better off continuing to investing in those online platforms, in your own company website where students are applying directly, and then of course continuing to form those relationships with different colleges and universities. That said, do want to share that at least half of students actually access career services 2 to 3 times a semester. So while students might not be identifying this as the avenue that they're leveraging most to discover jobs and internships, we are seeing that students are continuing to access career services throughout their education. So 30% of students are visiting 2 to 3 times per semester, 22% 4 or more times per semester. So definitely more, around 50% are accessing that at least 2 to 3 times. And only 11% of students that we surveyed said that they have just never used career services. So students are definitely still visiting career services, but not necessarily identifying it as the primary way that they're discovering jobs and internships. In terms of when students are a little further along in their job search, so what factors actually influence them to accept an offer? We asked students that question, which following are the most important factors that would influence you to accept a job or internship offer. As we're seeing, and this is something that has been really consistent in our data over the years, is that competitive compensation and benefits is the largest share of survey respondents are selecting that as the most influential factor. So it's closely followed by professional development and the role aligning with long-term career interests, as well as potential for growth and upward mobility. We're seeing a little bit less about, company culture that they feel excited about, location of the role, stability of company and current market conditions, or good experience applying. So while those things definitely are important, we're seeing that compensation and benefits, as well as how will I be able to progress in this company, how will I grow, is the top in terms of their priorities. If a student accepts an offer, we also wanted to know how are the state of renegs going these days. So as you might recall, about a year ago, there was a lot of talk about candidates reneging. Reneg rates were really at an all-time high, it seemed. So many candidates were just accepting an offer, then taking a different one. And so we've been asking this question in every one of our pulse surveys since spring 2022 to really get a sense of, is this attitude toward renegs changing based on the economy? So as you can see in spring 2022, 73% of students said if they accepted a job or internship, but then an offer came along that was better, would you rescind your original offer? 73% of students in the spring last year said they would. In the fall, about 75% of students said that they would rescind that offer. And then in spring, so in January, when we conducted the same survey, about 68% of students said that they would rescind an offer. I do want to note that this does not mean that 68% of candidates are reneging on offers or 75%. And actually, our data from the spring found that about 1 in 5 candidates actually went through with reneging on an offer, but the intentionality and the openness to reneging does still remain relatively high. So while we've seen that there's been a slight decrease in this overall attitude and acceptability of reneging, 68% of candidates are still saying, you know what, in this economy with everything being tough, even if I managed to get a job offer, if a better one came along, I would go ahead and renege. I would be open to doing that. We continue to ask why students actually would renege. So what would be the reason you would rescind that offer for a different one? And what we're seeing consistently is just like we saw the reason a candidate would accept an offer, these are the consistent reasons that they would renege on an offer. So salary and compensation continues to be a really motivating factor for candidates. With our most recent survey, 66% of candidates saying that that would be the reason they would rescind an offer for a different one. That said, it's not all about the money. We do see that candidates are saying if the new position better aligned with long-term career goals. So around 61% of candidates compared to 59%, that stayed pretty consistent, We are seeing that the new position offered better work-life balance flexibility. That's dropped in recent times. Not too many candidates would renege over company culture, actually. So that's something to keep in mind, that if a candidate really does like your culture, they're not likely just trying to seek out a better culture at another company. It really comes down to compensation. And then we added this question in our recent survey, just given the market conditions. And 40% of students did say they would consider reneging on an offer if the new position had better job security. So while it's not a majority share, we are still seeing a share of candidates that would consider reneging if the position they were offered did have better job security. And the last thing I want to share here is another interesting trend that has shifted over the course of time. So we've asked candidates this since, again, last year, spring 2022, about when searching for roles, what is your preferred work setting? So this I find to be really interesting because, as you can see here, in spring of 2022, so before a whole set of candidates probably went through a summer internship where they might have had a lot of flexibility, we saw 55% of candidates actually wanted a hybrid work structure based on personal preference. So the opportunity to work remotely or in person when they prefer it. What we've seen shift over time is that has decreased quite drastically, and we've actually seen a much bigger shift to hybrid based on company distinction. So that's the company saying there's a set number of days to work in person versus remotely. In spring 2022, only 21% of respondents wanted that hybrid based on company distinction, and now 36% of respondents want that hybrid work based on company distinction. We've also seen certain things go up as well. So fully remote work has stayed relatively low in terms of candidates wanting fully remote work. But as you can see in the spring, our most recent survey, around 16% of candidates want fully remote work. And actually, the number of candidates who want fully in-person work has increased in spring 2022. So back in spring 2022, only 13% of respondents said they'd want fully in-person work, which has now increased to 21% saying that they would want fully in-person work, which is not far off actually from the amount of candidates saying that they would want hybrid based on personal preference. So this is just a really interesting thing to look at, because there's tons of news stories out there about Gen Z doesn't want to go back in the office, or return to office policies are not going to connect with the new generation. And then there's also a lot of articles that say Gen Z hates remote work and they really want to get back into the office. And the truth is, the truth really does lie somewhere in the middle here. And students do want to go into the office. 21% of them are actually preferred fully in person. But what we are seeing is that it does seem like Gen Z wants that hybrid work still, but a large share of them would prefer to have that company distinction. So it's safe to say that around 50% of candidates would prefer that hybrid based on company distinction, or even fully in person. And fully remote work is currently the least popular of all of these options. So this is just something to take away from this presentation. If you're wondering what kind of policy should we do, what should we do with our summer interns, a safe bet would be that hybrid based on company distinction, and making sure that you do get candidates in the office in some way. To close it out, and this would be a great time if you have questions to put those in the Q&A, because we are about to move on to Q&A. So if you have all those questions firing off, definitely put those in the Q&A. See some filing in now. So just some key takeaways here with this data. Gen Z's job search confidence has definitely waned. So compared to the fall, today's students are significantly less confident in their employment prospects. And a lot of them are concerned because they don't know which companies are hiring amidst the economic troubles. So Gen Z confidence has waned, and students are looking to companies to really signal that they are open to hiring early career candidates. Hybrid is also the status quo. So it's not just the work format. It's from attending recruitment to events to actually how they search for roles. Gen Z is approaching employment through a hybrid lens and does not necessarily prefer in-person or remote over each other. So when it comes to where they want to work, but then also what kind of recruitment events they're attending, it's definitely somewhere in between, where they're going to some virtual, some in person. And finally, compensation and growth are top motivators for both accepting a job offer and then reneging on that job offer and accepting a different one. So this is really important to know, that when you're connecting with Gen Z talent, you're hoping to win them over or keep them from reneging on an offer, to make sure they're really understanding of the compensation that they're getting, and not just the salary, but what other factors in that compensation package are valuable, and also how they can grow at your company, the kind of professional development opportunities you offer, how you're going to help them grow and progress through your company over time. Really important to retain Gen Z and to bring them into your company. So on that note, I do want to thank everyone, first of all, for listening to all of that great data and just interacting as well. I do want to remind everyone, I'm happy to connect on LinkedIn if you have any additional questions about this data. Happy to point you to some of our other content because we have so much data out there. But I'm going to take a look at the chat and the Q&A to go through some of these questions. The data on the new data on Gen Z job search is not currently available to download because it's hot off the press, but we are actually going to release a couple articles about that. We're not going to do a full report for the recent survey that we did, but we will produce a couple of articles that will be available on our blog, which is ripplematch.com/insights. And again, feel free to connect with me and I'm happy to send that along. And then can you repeat what company distinction means? Does that mean the schedule is set by the company? We require 3 days in office per week. Yes. So when we ask this question to students, when we pose this in the survey, we gave them this answer of hybrid based on company distinction, set number of days to work in person versus remotely. And in the survey itself, we did actually include example 3 days in person, 2 days remote. We just didn't include it on these slides for spacing purposes, but company distinction means that the student just can't come in whenever they want. It's, you're in Monday, Wednesday, Friday, or Tuesday, Thursday. Okay, cool. Let's see. Let me just answer a couple of these live. Okay. So in terms of what types of roles and industries are of interest for Gen Z. So this is an interesting question because I would say there are roles that Gen Z shies away from, actually, just in terms of their perceptions, but the things that they want from a career would mean they should be interested in that kind of role. So a good example of this is a sales role. We see a lot of candidates on our platform just not quite as interested in sales roles as they might be in other roles. And just, in general, the perception of sales is, that it can be challenging. It has a lot of perceptions maybe of, what sales used to be. So car salesman, which is totally not the case. Sales is such a great way for students to, work on their interpersonal skills, to really make a lot of money. And we see a lot of students, they want high compensation. They're concerned about financial stability. So I would say when it comes to roles and interests in industries, Gen Z does seem to be most interested in what they're familiar with in terms of what they're learning about in school. So those job paths that seem to be most associated with their majors, or careers with companies that are in the news a lot. So just that brand name recognition. And it really does seem to be that candidates just brand recognition, are going and typing in a company they're familiar with. But in terms of what they're actually interested in, I think it's important to identify that Gen Z, what they actually want from a job, which is high compensation, good professional development, flexibility, is not actually offered a lot of times by companies that offer that are a little more well-known necessarily, or that are just right in front of them. So that is a little bit of a tricky question, but I will say that it's important to focus on what Gen Z prioritizes in terms of their values, which we know is definitely professional development, definitely compensation, and to highlight that when approaching them with your job, because frankly, a lot of jobs that Gen Z just doesn't know exist, and a lot of industries that they have no familiarity with, such as manufacturing. So just that's what I would say, is familiarity is a big portion of how college students are seeking jobs. And then this question on how open to relocation is Gen Z. That's something that I don't have in this presentation, but based on my previous report that we released in the fall, Gen Z is relatively open to relocation. They do prefer larger cities, mid-sized cities, and are not quite as interested in relocating to a suburban area or rural. But we also did ask them what are the factors that would most influence you to relocate. And what we actually saw from that is the number one motivator for Gen Z to relocate is compensation in comparison to cost of living. So high compensation in comparison to cost of living. So we're seeing that Gen Z wants to live in big cities. They want to move to these, not like the Milwaukee, for example. They want to move to a New York or a Boston, but the actual cost of living is much more accessible in these smaller cities. So I would say that's another one where I think it's definitely something that college students have an idea of what they want, but then what we see from the data is they actually want something else. So when you're kind of talking with students, marketing your opportunities, if a student is going to relocate, leaning into, hey, this is a really affordable place to live, and especially compared to your compensation, you're in some of the upper parts of what someone would make here. I think that's a good way to approach something if you're in a location that isn't necessarily as flashy as a San Francisco, Los Angeles, a Chicago, is kind of focusing on how you can have those benefits and you're really in relation to the cost of living pretty strong. Let me look at a couple more of these. Okay, this is a good question. So do you see an oversaturation of D&I programs in the market? How can companies adjust to provide these opportunities to students, but not overwhelm them with so many programs? That's a great question, especially considering that, we do see some schools get, so much attention, so much programs, and then some schools such as, community colleges or maybe HSIs not getting as much of, the share of partnerships. I think when it comes to that is there's not necessarily an oversaturation of D&I programs in the market. I do think there could be a bit of an imbalance in terms of what programs are getting the most attention. So similarly to how, we once saw such a big focus on Ivy League schools and elite institutions, and all of the programs are going to these same universities, we do see a little bit of that with schools today. So for example, there are around 100 HBCUs, but many companies are visiting, just some of the top 5. So Howard, Spelman, Morehouse, Florida A&M. So we're seeing those are all really awesome HBCUs. They're really great, have so many talented students, but there's many more HBCUs out there that are all really scattered throughout the Northeast, the Southeast. And it's a really great way to, if you can figure out how can I connect with these other schools and actually put out those programs that aren't just in the high concentration of programs that we're seeing. I think that's a really good way to not overwhelm students with those opportunities, because there's some students that are getting inundated with opportunities, inundated with virtual event invitations, with job openings, but there's also a ton of other students, such as at all those other HBCUs or maybe HSIs that are also community colleges, that are not getting really any connection or attention from that many companies. So I think a great way to kind of avoid that oversaturation is to really look at where not that many companies are looking. And as we saw from the data, that is community colleges, that is HSIs in some cases. So I think definitely figuring out adjusting where you can put resources and partnerships in some areas that potentially don't see that much attention and partnership. That's what I would say to that one. We probably have time for one more question, just to make sure that we finish on time. So let me take a quick look about this. Let's see. Okay, any insight on what employers can do to reduce renege rates from Gen Z, aside from providing competitive pay? That's a really great question. I think one thing to do there, and I have a couple pieces of advice here. So one piece of advice that I actually heard from a roundtable that I hosted recently with some of our employer partners. This is a company that was seeing a lot of reneges, and what they did upfront with students is they actually explained the gravity of the situation of accepting an offer, because what we've heard a lot is students these days actually don't realize what reneging on an offer does. They don't necessarily realize that it's a contract, it's taking a spot from another student. So one company actually took this approach of when they're going over the offer with the student, they actually did take the time to explain that, we're really excited if you want to accept this offer, but, it is really important that you think through this and place a lot of weight on this decision, because when you accept this offer, this is actually taking the spot away from another student. So if you're approaching this as anything like a placeholder, or you're not 100% sold on it, really want you to think about that, because there's so many students out there that we know really would want this opportunity, and we wouldn't want them to be left out of the opportunity to have this. So they did see faster rejection rates of their offer. They just saw students get back to them sooner saying, actually, I don't want this offer, and just lower renege rates in general, because they did take that time to really ground this in what happens when you do renege on an offer. Aside from that, the other thing I'd say is just making sure, one, that with your competitive pay, you go over all the parts included in compensation. So not just your salary, but do you offer things like educational stipends, health insurance benefits with maybe a low premium, remote work stipends, anything that isn't necessarily tied to salary. And then thirdly, just really making sure you're highlighting the path for growth at your company, and really just showing this is how someone moved through the company over 3 years, or this is how you can really upskill in this role. So I think focusing on, one, just grounding the expectations, what it means to renege, making sure you show the holistic parts of your compensation package, and then showing the potential for career growth. On that note, I think we are out of time. So I do want to go ahead and just thank everyone for being here and tuning in. And yeah, feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. I hope all of you took away some great insights here today, and hope to see you all next time. So thank you for listening today, and have a great weekend. So goodbye, everyone. Thank you so much.